The rain had been falling for hours by the time Christopher pushed through the glass door of Megan's diner. It was the kind of rain that soaked through clothes in seconds, cold and relentless, turning the streets of southeast Portland into rivers of reflected neon and headlights. The diner sat on the corner of Division Street, a relic from the 1970s with its faded red lettering and windows that fogged up on nights like this. Inside, the air smelled of coffee that had been sitting too long on the burner and the faint sweetness of pie left over from the dinner rush. Christopher stood in the doorway for a moment, water dripping from his jacket onto the worn welcome mat. His right eye was swollen, the skin around it a deep purple that was already starting to yellow at the edges. His lower lip was split, and when he touched it unconsciously with his tongue, he tasted copper. He was 38 years old, but tonight he felt ancient, every year weighing on him like stones in his pockets. The diner was nearly empty. An elderly man sat in the far booth, reading a newspaper that was probably 3 days old. A young couple occupied a table near the window, speaking in low voices, their hands intertwined on the tabletop. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly, casting everything in a pale, clinical glow that made the red vinyl seats look pink and washed out. Christopher chose a stool at the counter, the one furthest from the door. He lowered himself carefully onto it, favoring his left side. His ribs ached with each breath, a deep, grinding pain that reminded him of why he was here instead of at home. Home. The word felt hollow. The studio apartment he rented month to month on Southeast 82nd was just a place to sleep, assuming he could sleep, which he rarely did anymore. Behind the counter, Megan was wiping down the coffee station with methodical efficiency. She was in her early 30s, with dark blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and lines around her eyes that spoke of too many late nights and not enough rest. She wore the diner's standard uniform, a white button-down shirt with Megan's Diner embroidered in red thread over the pocket, black slacks, and non-slip shoes that had seen better days. When she turned and saw Christopher, her hands stilled for just a fraction of a second. Her eyes moved across his face, taking in the damage, but she didn't react the way most people would. No gasp, no sudden concern, no barrage of questions. Instead, she simply asked, "Coffee?" Her voice was gentle, professionally neutral, the kind of tone that invited nothing, but also offered no judgment. Christopher nodded, not trusting his voice yet. His throat felt tight, like someone had their hands wrapped around it even though no one was touching him. Megan poured the coffee into a heavy ceramic mug, white with a thin blue stripe around the rim. She set it in front of him along with a small pitcher of cream and a handful of sugar packets. "Let me know if you need anything else," she said, and then she moved away, giving him space. Christopher wrapped both hands around the mug, feeling the heat seep into his palms. His hands were shaking, had been shaking since he left the parking lot behind the construction supply warehouse on Southeast McLaughlin Boulevard. He tried to steady them, pressing his palms harder against the ceramic, but the tremor persisted. It wasn't the cold. It wasn't even the pain. It was something deeper, something that had been building for months, maybe years, and tonight, it had finally broken through the surface. He lifted the mug to his lips and took a sip. The coffee was bitter and overbrewed, exactly what he needed. He focused on the taste, the heat, the simple act of swallowing, small things, manageable things. Across the counter, Megan was restocking napkins in the dispensers, her movements practiced and efficient. Christopher watched her peripherally, careful not to stare. There was something calming about her presence, the way she moved through the space with quiet confidence. She looked tired, the kind of tired that went bone deep, but she carried herself with a dignity that he recognized because he used to have it himself, before everything fell apart. The bell above the door chimed, and a man in a delivery uniform entered, stamping his feet on the mat. "Evening, Megan," he called out cheerfully. "Hey, Marcus. The usual?" She was already reaching for a to-go cup. "You know it. This rain is something else tonight." "Supposed to keep up through the weekend," Megan replied, filling the cup with fresh coffee from a different pot. "Drive safe out there." Marcus paid, left a few dollars in the tip jar, and headed back into the night. The brief interruption ended, and the diner settled back into its quiet rhythm. The elderly man in the booth turned a page of his newspaper. The couple by the window had stopped talking and were simply sitting together, watching the rain streak down the glass. Christopher took another sip of coffee and felt something inside him unclench slightly. This place, with its worn floors and harsh lighting and the smell of old coffee, felt safer than anywhere he had been in months. There was an anonymity here, a blessed absence of expectations. No one knew him. No one was asking him to be anything other than a man drinking coffee at a counter. Megan returned to his end of the counter, this time with a damp cloth in her hand. She began wiping down the surface near him, working in slow, careful circles. After a moment, she spoke without looking directly at him. "Long night?" Christopher hesitated. "Yeah, long night. Those happen." She rinsed the cloth in a small sink behind the counter, wrung it out. "You eaten anything?" He shook his head. Food hadn't even occurred to him. His stomach felt like a knot, tight and resistant. "Let me get you something," Megan said. It wasn't a question, but it wasn't pushy either. Before he could protest, she had moved down to the kitchen window and was speaking quietly to someone on the other side. A minute later, she returned with a plate. A slice of apple pie with a scoop of vanilla ice cream slowly melting on top. She set it in front of him. "On the house." Christopher looked at the pie, then up at her. "You don't have to." "I know," she said simply. "But you look like you could use it." There was no pity in her voice, no performative kindness. It was matter-of-fact, practical, the kind of gesture that came from genuine understanding rather than obligation. Christopher felt his throat tighten again, but for a different reason this time. "Thank you," he managed. Megan nodded and moved away again, giving him privacy to eat. Christopher picked up the fork and took a bite. The pie was good, not fancy, but homemade. The apples soft and sweet with just enough cinnamon. He hadn't realized how hungry he was until the first bite, and then he ate slowly, mechanically, forcing himself to chew and swallow even though his split lip protested. As he ate, he became aware of Megan watching him from the other end of the counter. Not obviously, not intrusively, but with the kind of peripheral attention that came from years of reading people in this profession. She was assessing him, he realized, trying to figure out what kind of trouble he was in and whether it was the kind that would follow him through her door. He couldn't blame her for that. When he finished the pie, Megan returned with the coffee pot and refilled his mug without asking. "You from around here?" she asked, her tone conversational but cautious. "Southeast," Christopher said, "near 82nd. She nodded, as if that told her something. Southeast 82nd was not a nice neighborhood. It was where people landed when they were running out of options, when the rent was the only thing that mattered, and safety was a luxury. "I'm a few blocks from there myself," Megan said. "Off Division, near 96th. It was an offering of information, a small gesture of trust. Christopher recognized it for what it was and felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Connection, however fragile. "You work nights usually?" he asked. "Most nights. Better tips, and it fits with my daughter's schedule. She's 7. My mom watches her while I'm here." Megan glanced at the clock on the wall. It was just past midnight. "We're open until 6, so I get home in time to take her to school." Christopher did the math. That meant Megan probably slept 4, maybe 5 hours a day if she was lucky. He could see it in her face now, the exhaustion that lived beneath the professional demeanor. She was running on fumes just like he was, just like everyone else trying to survive in a city that had become too expensive for people like them. "That's a tough schedule," he said. "It works." She shrugged, but there was a brittleness to the gesture. "You do what you have to do." The elderly man in the booth stood up, left a few bills on the table and made his way to the door. "Night, Megan." "Good night, Mr. Patterson. Stay dry." The door closed behind him, and now it was just Christopher, Megan, and the young couple who seemed lost in their own world. The diner felt even quieter, the rain louder against the windows. Megan pulled a small tub from beneath the counter, plastic, blue, filled with ice water. She reached into it and pulled out a clean dish towel, wringing it out until it was cold and damp but not dripping. Christopher watched her hands, rough from years of work, efficient and certain. She approached him slowly, the cloth in her hands. "Do you mind?" she asked, gesturing toward his face. Christopher froze. Every instinct told him to say no, to pull away, to maintain the walls he had spent so long building. But something about the way she asked, respectful, giving him the choice, made him hesitate. "I'm okay," he said automatically. "I know you are," Megan replied, "but that's going to swell worse if you don't ice it soon. And I'm guessing you're not planning to go to the emergency room." She was right. He had no insurance, no money for a hospital bill that would bury him even deeper than he already was. Christopher looked down at his coffee, at his hands still wrapped around the mug, and made a decision that surprised him. "Okay," he said quietly. Megan stepped closer, moving around the counter so she was standing beside him rather than across from him. The proximity should have felt threatening, but it didn't. She was careful not to crowd him, maintaining a respectful distance even as she raised the cold cloth toward his face. "This might sting a little," she warned. When the cloth touched his swollen eye, Christopher sucked in a sharp breath. The cold was shocking, intense, but after the initial jolt it felt good. The pain began to dull, the throbbing easing just slightly. Megan held the cloth there gently, her other hand hovering near his shoulder but not quite touching, offering support without contact. Christopher closed his good eye, focused on breathing, in through his nose, out through his mouth, steady, controlled. But something was happening inside him, something he couldn't control. The kindness of the gesture, so simple and yet so unexpected, was cracking through the numbness he had wrapped around himself like armor. His chest felt tight. His breath hitched. "Easy," Megan said softly. "Just breathe." But he couldn't. The tightness in his chest was spreading, rising up into his throat, behind his eyes. He tried to push it down, to force it back into whatever dark place it had been living, but it was too strong, too much. His breath came faster, shallower, and then without warning, wetness spilled over his good eye and ran down his cheek. He was crying. He hadn't even realized it was happening until he felt the tears hot against his cold skin. Embarrassment flooded through him, sharp and mortifying. He tried to pull away, to stand up, to leave, but Megan's hand, the one that had been hovering, settled lightly on his shoulder, keeping him still. "It's okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to go anywhere." Christopher's hands came up to his face, covering his eyes, trying to hide the tears that wouldn't stop. His shoulders shook. He tried to speak, to apologize, but all that came out was a choked sound that he hated himself for making. Megan didn't move away. She kept the cold cloth pressed gently against his eye, her hand steady on his shoulder, anchoring him through the storm of emotion he could no longer contain. She didn't tell him to stop. She didn't ask what was wrong. She simply stood there, a quiet presence in the chaos, and let him break apart in the only safe place he had found in months. The tears came harder now, racking his whole body. They were for everything, for the business he had lost, for the debts that kept piling up no matter how hard he worked, for the friends who had stopped calling, for the woman who had left him 2 years ago because she couldn't watch him drown anymore. They were for the man he used to be, the one who had plans and hope and believed that hard work and good intentions were enough. That man was gone, and Christopher was finally grieving him. Time became strange. He didn't know if he cried for 1 minute or 10. All he knew was that eventually the tears slowed, then stopped, leaving him hollow and exhausted but somehow lighter. He lowered his hands slowly, keeping his eyes downcast, unable to look at Megan. "I'm sorry," he rasped. "I didn't mean to." "Don't," Megan said firmly. She pulled the cloth away, dipped it back in the ice water, wrung it out again. "Don't apologize for being human." She pressed the cloth against his other cheek now, wiping away the tears with the same gentle efficiency she had brought to everything else. Christopher finally looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something in her eyes that he recognized. It was the look of someone who understood, someone who had been where he was, someone who knew that sometimes the kindness of a stranger was the only thing keeping you tethered to the world. "Thank you," he said, and this time he meant it for more than just the pie and coffee. Megan nodded, a small, sad smile touching her lips. We all need someone to press pause on the pain sometimes, even if it's just for a minute. She moved back behind the counter, rinsed the cloth one more time, and placed it in a clean container. The young couple by the window stood up, paid their bill, and left, their voices a soft murmur as they passed. Now it was just the two of them in the empty diner, the rain still falling outside, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Christopher finished his coffee. Megan busied herself with small tasks, wiping down tables, refilling sugar dispensers, straightening menus. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that came after something significant had happened, something that neither of them quite knew how to name yet. Finally, Christopher pulled out his wallet. He had $23 and some change, barely enough to cover his half of the studio apartment rent that was due in 3 days. He left $15 on the counter, far more than the pie and coffee were worth, and stood up carefully. "You didn't have to do that," Megan said, looking at the money. "Yes, I did," Christopher replied. He walked toward the door, his body aching with every step, but somehow the weight felt different now. Not lighter, exactly, but more bearable. He paused with his hand on the door handle and looked back. Megan was watching him, her arms crossed loosely over her chest, her expression unreadable. "Will you be back?" she asked. Christopher didn't know the answer to that question. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring or if he would even make it through the night without falling apart again. But something about this place, about her, made him want to try. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe is good enough," Megan replied. Doors open. Christopher pushed through the door and back into the rain. It was still cold, still relentless, but as he walked down Division Street with his hands in his pockets and his face turned up to the sky, He thought about the weight of silence and the unexpected mercy of a cold cloth pressed against bruised skin by someone who understood that sometimes the deepest wounds were the ones nobody could see. Behind him, through the rain-streaked window of Megan's diner, a light stayed on. Christopher returned to Megan's diner 3 nights later. He told himself it was because the coffee was decent and the pie was good. He told himself it was convenient, close enough to his apartment that he could walk even in the rain. He told himself it had nothing to do with the way Megan had stood beside him that first night, holding a cold cloth to his bruised face without asking questions, without demanding explanations, without making him feel smaller than he already felt. But he knew he was lying to himself. It was a Thursday night just past 11. The rain had finally stopped after nearly a week of constant downpour, leaving the streets slick and reflective under the amber glow of streetlights. The air smelled clean, washed of the usual city odors, exhaust and garbage, and the particular staleness that came from too many people living too close together. Christopher walked slowly, his hands in the pockets of his jacket, his ribs still tender but healing. The swelling around his eye had gone down significantly, leaving behind a fading yellow-green bruise that he could almost cover with the brim of his baseball cap. The diner looked exactly as it had before. Same faded red lettering, same fogged windows, same warm light spilling out onto the sidewalk. Through the glass he could see Megan behind the counter, her ponytail slightly messier than it had been the other night, her posture betraying exhaustion even from a distance. Christopher hesitated outside the door. What was he doing here? What did he expect? That somehow this woman, this stranger who had shown him a moment of kindness, would fix everything that was broken in his life. That was ridiculous. Childish even. He should turn around, go home, stop looking for Jew in places that couldn't offer it. But his hand was already on the door handle, and before he could talk himself out of it, he was inside. The warmth hit him immediately, along with the familiar smell of coffee and something baking in the kitchen. Cinnamon, sugar, butter. There were more customers tonight. A group of teenagers in one booth, laughing over shared fries. A man in a business suit typing furiously on a laptop. A woman reading a paperback novel. A half-eaten sandwich beside her. Megan looked up when the bell chimed. Their eyes met, and something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe relief. He couldn't quite tell. She finished pouring coffee for the businessman and then made her way over to where Christopher had taken the same seat at the counter as before. "Hey," she said simply. "Hey," Christopher replied. "Coffee? Please." She poured, her movements as efficient as he remembered, but this time when she set the mug down in front of him, her eyes lingered on his face, taking in the fading bruise. "Healing okay?" she asked. "Yeah, thanks to you." Megan shrugged, dismissing the gratitude. "You hungry? We've got fresh apple turnovers. Jimmy made them about an hour ago." "Sure, that sounds good." She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a turnover on a small plate, the pastry golden and flaking, still warm. Christopher took a bite and closed his eyes briefly. It was perfect. Buttery crust, sweet apples, just the right amount of cinnamon. Simple food, well made. The kind of thing that reminded you that not everything in the world was complicated. "Good?" Megan asked. "Really good," she smiled. A small, tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll tell Jimmy. He'll be pleased." The teenagers in the booth erupted in laughter, and Megan glanced over at them with the practiced assessment of someone who had been dealing with late-night crowds for years. They seemed harmless enough, just kids being loud, burning energy, taking advantage of the fact that Megan's diner was one of the few places open past 10 on a weeknight. Christopher ate slowly, savoring each bite, in no hurry to be anywhere else. He watched Megan work, moving between tables, refilling coffee, clearing dishes, exchanging brief pleasantries with customers. She was good at her job, he realized. Not just competent, but genuinely good. She remembered people's orders, asked about their days, laughed at jokes, even when they probably weren't that funny. She made people feel seen, which was a skill more valuable than most people realized. The businessman packed up his laptop and left, dropping a generous tip on the table. The woman with the paperback followed soon after. The teenagers lingered, but eventually they too paid their bill and headed out into the night, leaving the diner much quieter. Megan made her rounds, wiping down tables, resetting the condiments, preparing for whatever the rest of the night would bring. When she returned to the counter, she poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the back counter facing Christopher. "So," she said, "what brings you back?" It was a direct question, asked without accusation but with genuine curiosity. Christopher considered lying, deflecting, giving some easy answer that wouldn't require him to be honest. But something about the way she was looking at him, open, patient, giving him space to be real, made him choose truth instead. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe because this is the first place in a long time where I didn't feel like I was drowning." Megan nodded slowly, as if this made perfect sense to her. "I get that. Sometimes you just need a place where nobody expects anything from you except maybe to drink your coffee and not cause trouble." "Exactly." She took a sip of her own coffee, grimaced slightly. It had probably been sitting too long, and set the mug down. "You doing okay? Since the other night, I mean." Christopher considered the question. Was he doing okay? He had picked up 2 more day labor shifts, which meant he would probably make rent this month. His body was healing. He hadn't had any more confrontations with the people he owed money to, though he knew that was temporary. They would come back eventually, they always did. But somehow, despite everything still being objectively terrible, he felt different, more present, less like he was watching his own life from somewhere outside himself. "I'm managing," he said, "one day at a time. That's all any of us can do," Megan replied. A comfortable silence settled between them. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights sweeping across the diner windows. The fluorescent lights overhead continued their quiet hum. The coffee maker gurgled as it finished brewing a fresh pot. "Can I ask what happened?" Megan said quietly. "The other night, I mean. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but sometimes it helps to talk." Christopher wrapped his hands around his mug, feeling the warmth seep into his palms. He hadn't talked about it with anyone. Not really. There was no one left to talk to. His parents were gone. His mother to cancer 5 years ago. His father to a heart attack 2 years after that. He had a brother in California, but they hadn't spoken in over a year. Not since Thanksgiving, when Christopher had borrowed money he still hadn't paid back. His ex-girlfriend Sarah had made it clear she wanted nothing to do with him. His friends had slowly drifted away, tired of watching him spiral, tired of his excuses, tired of being asked for help he could never repay. But here was this woman, this near stranger, offering to listen, and maybe that was exactly what he needed. Someone with no history, no expectations, no reason to judge him against the person he used to be. "I used to own a small construction business," Christopher began, his voice low. "Nothing fancy, just me and a couple of guys. We did remodeling work, kitchen renovations, bathroom updates, that kind of thing. It was good for a while, really good. I was making decent money, had regular clients, even hired on a third worker. I thought I was building something real." Megan listened without interrupting, her attention focused completely on him. "Then about 2 years ago I took on a big project. A whole house renovation for this couple in southwest Portland. They seemed legitimate, had references, put down a deposit. I hired 2 more guys, bought materials, started the work. We were about halfway through when they stopped paying. Just stopped. Came up with excuses. Delayed again. By the time I realized they were never going to pay, I was already deep in the hole. I'd bought materials on credit, paid the workers out of my own pocket, fallen behind on everything else." He paused, took a sip of coffee, forced himself to continue. "I tried to sue them, but that takes money too. Money I didn't have. The business collapsed. I had to let everyone go. Started taking whatever work I could find, day labor, construction cleanup, anything. But the debts kept piling up. Credit cards, loans I'd taken out to keep the business afloat, medical bills from when I didn't have insurance. I fell behind on everything. And someone came to collect," Megan said softly. Christopher nodded. "I borrowed money from the wrong people. When you're desperate, you stop being careful about where the help comes from. They were patient at first, but patience runs out. They sent someone to remind me that the debt wasn't going away. That's how I ended up looking like I did the other night." "I'm sorry," Megan said, and the sincerity in her voice made Christopher's chest tighten. "That's not fair. You were trying to do honest work, and you got taken advantage of." "Doesn't matter if it's fair," Christopher replied. "It is what it is. I made bad choices. I trusted the wrong people. I got in over my head. That's on me." "Maybe," Megan allowed. "But that doesn't mean you deserved what happened." They fell quiet again. Christopher finished his turnover, his coffee. The door chimed and 2 men in their 20s entered, clearly having come from a bar somewhere, their voices too loud, their movements unsteady. Megan excused herself and went to serve them, patient and professional even as they made increasingly inappropriate jokes. She deflected with practiced ease, poured their coffee, took their order for late-night breakfast food, and retreated to the kitchen window. When she returned to Christopher, she looked more tired than before. "Sorry about that," she said. "You handle it well. Lots of practice." She refilled both their mugs. "You're not the only one with a story, you know." "Yeah?" Megan glanced over at the 2 men, making sure they were occupied with their phones, then leaned against the counter closer to Christopher, lowering her voice. "I was married for 4 years," she said. "Met him when I was 25. He seemed great at first. Charming, attentive, told me I was beautiful every day. We got married fast, maybe too fast. Had my daughter Emma a year later, and for a while it was good. Or I thought it was good. I was probably just good at pretending." Christopher heard the shift in her tone, the way the words became more careful, more measured. "He had a temper," Megan continued. "It started small. Raised voice, slammed doors, punching walls. Then it got worse. He never—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He never crossed certain lines, but he came close. Close enough that I knew it was only a matter of time. And I couldn't let Emma grow up in that. I couldn't let her think that was what love looked like." "So you left," Christopher said. "So I left. 2 years ago. Took Emma, took what I could carry, and left everything else behind. Filed for separation, got a restraining order, moved to a different part of the city. Started over from nothing. That takes courage." Megan shook her head. "It takes desperation. You don't leave because you're brave. You leave because staying would destroy you." Christopher understood that in his bones. The desperation that masqueraded as bravery. The survival instinct that looked like choice when really it was just the only option left. "Does he still bother you?" Christopher asked. Megan's jaw tightened slightly. "Sometimes. He's not supposed to because of the restraining order, but that's just a piece of paper. It doesn't actually stop him from showing up places, from texting from new numbers, from trying to see Emma when he's not supposed to. He's been quiet lately, which worries me more than when he was loud. Like he's planning something." "Have you thought about leaving Portland?" Christopher asked. "Every day," Megan admitted. "I have a cousin in Boise who's offered us a place to stay, but moving costs money. And I've built something here. This job, Emma's school, my mom nearby to help with childcare. Starting over again feels impossible some days." The 2 men at the booth called out for more coffee. Megan excused herself again, performed her duties with the same professional grace, returned to Christopher. "Sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to dump all that on you." "You didn't dump anything," Christopher said. "I asked. And besides, fair is fair. I told you my story." Megan smiled, and this time it did reach her eyes. "I guess we're both pretty broken, huh?" "Maybe," Christopher said. "Or maybe we're just still here. Still trying. That counts for something." "Does it?" The question was genuine, vulnerable in a way that made Christopher realize how much strength it took for her to ask it. "Yeah," he said firmly. "It does." The door chimed again, and an older woman entered, shaking rain from her umbrella even though it wasn't raining anymore. Megan went to greet her, and Christopher sat alone with his thoughts, processing everything she had shared. It occurred to him that they were not so different, he and Megan, both running from things, both trying to build something stable on foundations that kept shifting, both exhausted but still showing up, still putting one foot in front of the other because what else was there to do? The night deepened. The 2 men at the booth eventually paid and left. The older woman ordered soup and bread, ate slowly while reading something on her phone. Christopher ordered another coffee, then another. Megan didn't comment on how long he had been sitting there. Maybe she understood that he had nowhere else he wanted to be, or maybe she simply didn't mind the company. Around 2 in the morning, the older woman left, and the diner was empty, except for Christopher and Megan. She dimmed some of the lights. Standard procedure for the dead hours between 2 and 5, when foot traffic dropped to almost nothing. The reduced lighting made the space feel smaller, more intimate, like they were in a bubble separate from the rest of the world. Megan grabbed the blue tub from beneath the counter, the same one she had used before, and filled it with fresh ice and water. She pulled out a clean cloth, wrung it until it was cold and damp, and approached Christopher with it. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to his face. The bruise was nearly gone, but Christopher understood that the gesture meant more than just icing an injury. It was about connection, about care, about one human acknowledging another's pain and trying to ease it in whatever small way possible. "Yeah," he said softly. Megan stepped around the counter again, positioning herself beside him. She raised the cloth to his face, pressing it gently against where the bruise had been. The cold was shocking, bracing, but welcome. Christopher closed his eyes, letting himself feel the sensation, the kindness embedded in it. And then, without warning, his breath caught. It started the same way it had before, a tightness in his chest, a constriction in his throat. But this time it was different. This time it wasn't just about the physical pain or the accumulated stress of his circumstances. This time it was about the realization that he had been alone for so long, carrying so much. and here was someone willing to stand beside him for no reason other than basic human decency. The tears came before he could stop them, hot and sudden, spilling over his closed eyelids and running down his cheeks. He tried to pull away, embarrassed again, but Megan's free hand found his shoulder, holding him steady. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're okay." But he wasn't okay, and they both knew it. He was falling apart right there at the counter of a diner at 2 in the morning, and he couldn't stop it, couldn't control it, couldn't push it back down where it belonged. His shoulders shook. His breath came in ragged gasps. He covered his face with his hands, pressing his palms hard against his eyes as if he could physically force the tears to stop. Megan didn't move away. She kept the cloth pressed gently against his face, kept her hand on his shoulder, kept her presence steady and calm even as he broke down completely. She didn't tell him to be quiet. She didn't tell him it would all be okay. She didn't offer empty platitudes or false comfort. She just stayed, and somehow that was enough. Time lost meaning. Christopher didn't know how long he cried. 5 minutes? 10? 15? All he knew was that eventually the tears slowed, then stopped, leaving him emptied out and exhausted in a way that felt almost peaceful. He lowered his hands slowly, keeping his eyes downcast, unable to meet Megan's gaze. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "I don't know why I keep doing this." "Because you need to," Megan said simply. She pulled the cloth away, dipped it back in the ice water, wrung it out, and gently wiped his face clean of tears. Sometimes the only way through is to let it out. Holding it in just makes it worse. Christopher finally looked up at her. In the dim light of the diner, with exhaustion etched into every line of her face, she looked beautiful, not in a conventional way, but in the way that people look beautiful when they're being genuinely themselves. Unguarded, honest, present. "Thank you," he said, "for not making me feel pathetic." "You're not pathetic," Megan replied firmly. "You're human. There's a difference." She returned the cloth to the tub and moved back behind the counter, putting some distance between them again. Christopher appreciated that, the way she seemed to know intuitively when to be close and when to give space. "Can I ask you something?" Christopher said after a moment. "Sure. Why are you being so kind to me? You don't know me. I'm just some guy who walked in here with a bruised face. You don't owe me anything." Megan considered the question, tilting her head slightly. When she answered, her voice was soft but certain. "Because someone was kind to me once when I needed it most, and because I know what it's like to feel invisible, to feel like you're drowning and nobody notices or cares, and because," she paused, meeting his eyes, "because I think maybe we're supposed to help each other. Not for any grand reason, just because we can." Christopher felt something shift inside him, some piece of armor that had been bolted in place for years loosening slightly. He didn't know what to call it. Hope maybe, or connection, or simply the recognition that he wasn't as alone as he thought he was. "I think you might be right," he said. Megan smiled. "Don't sound so surprised." The moment stretched between them, comfortable and significant at once. Then Megan glanced at the clock and sighed. "I should probably do something productive before the morning rush starts. You okay if I clean up a bit?" "Yeah, I should probably get going anyway." But he didn't move, and Megan didn't push him to leave. Instead, she moved through the diner, wiping down tables, sweeping the floor, restocking supplies, while Christopher sat at the counter and simply existed in the space. There was something meditative about watching her work, about being present in this quiet pocket of time when the rest of the city was sleeping. Eventually, Christopher stood up, pulled out his wallet, and left $20 on the counter. Again, more than the coffee and turnover warranted, but it felt important to contribute something, to not be a charity case, even though he knew Megan would never make him feel that way. "You keep over-tipping," Megan observed. "You keep undercharging," Christopher countered. She laughed, a real laugh that transformed her tired face into something lighter. "Fair point." Christopher walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. "Can I ask you something else?" "Sure. Would it be okay if I came back? Not just once, but regularly?" Megan's expression softened. "Christopher, you don't have to ask permission to come to a diner. But yes, I'd like that." "Okay then. I'll see you soon." "See you soon." Christopher stepped out into the night. The air was cold, but not unpleasantly so. The kind of cold that felt clean and sharp after the warmth of the diner. He looked up at the sky, where a few stars were visible between the clouds, and realized that for the first time in months, he wasn't dreading tomorrow. Behind him, through the window of Megan's diner, he could see her moving behind the counter, her silhouette backlit by the fluorescent lights. She looked up, caught him watching, and raised one hand in a small wave. Christopher waved back, then started the walk home, his hands in his pockets, his heart somehow both heavier and lighter than it had been when he arrived. Some walls, he was learning, were meant to crack, and maybe that wasn't a weakness. Maybe it was the only way to let the light in. Christopher came back the next night, and the night after that, and the night after that. It became a routine, the kind that settled into his bones without him quite realizing when it had shifted from intentional to inevitable. He would finish whatever work he had managed to pick up that day, hauling debris from construction sites, helping unload delivery trucks, occasionally getting called back by one of his old contacts for a small repair job, and then he would walk the 15 blocks from his apartment to Megan's diner, arriving sometime between 10 and 11 at night. He always sat in the same spot at the counter, always ordered coffee first, sometimes pie, sometimes a sandwich, once just toast because that was all his budget allowed that week. And Megan was always there, moving through the space with practiced efficiency, greeting him with a simple hey that somehow contained more warmth than most people's elaborate welcomes. They talked. Not constantly, not in a way that demanded attention, but in the easy rhythm of two people who had found unexpected comfort in each other's presence. Megan would share stories about Emma, how she had gotten in trouble at school for correcting her teacher's math, how she had decided she wanted to be a paleontologist this week after being an astronaut last week. Christopher would talk about the jobs he worked, the small victories of making enough to cover groceries, the frustrations of being constantly one emergency away from disaster. Sometimes they talked about deeper things, about what it felt like to lose everything you thought your life was supposed to be, about the exhaustion of carrying weight that no one else could see, about the small moments of grace that kept you going, a stranger's kindness, a child's laughter, the simple fact of waking up and choosing to try again. It was during the third week of these visits that Christopher first met Emma. It was a Saturday afternoon, unusual because Christopher normally came at night, but he had finished an early morning shift and found himself with nowhere to be, and no desire to sit alone in his apartment, so he had walked to the diner in daylight for the first time. The place looked different during the day, brighter, busier, more families and fewer solitary figures nursing coffee in the corners. Megan was working the lunch rush, moving between tables with the same grace she showed at night, but with an added layer of urgency. Christopher took his usual seat at the counter and waited patiently, watching her work. After a few minutes, she noticed him, and her face lit up with surprise. "You're here early," she said, pausing by the counter with a pot of coffee in one hand and a handful of menus in the other. "Couldn't sleep," Christopher said. "Thought I'd see what this place looks like when the sun is up." "Chaos, mostly," Megan replied, but she was smiling. "Give me 10 minutes to get through this rush and I'll get you something to eat. No hurry, I'm not going anywhere." Megan nodded and returned to her tables. Christopher sipped his coffee and observed the Saturday afternoon crowd. There were families mostly, parents with young children, teenagers meeting up after whatever weekend activities occupied their time, elderly couples sharing meals in comfortable silence. It was a different energy than the late-night atmosphere he had grown accustomed to, but not unwelcoming. Then he heard it, a voice, young and bright, calling out from somewhere behind the kitchen. Mom, I finished my homework. Can I have a cookie now?" A moment later, a little girl emerged from the hallway that led to the back office, a coloring book tucked under one arm. She had her mother's features, the same heart-shaped face, the same blue eyes, but where Megan carried exhaustion, Emma radiated energy. She was small for 7, wearing jeans and a purple shirt with a cartoon dinosaur on it, her dark blonde hair pulled back in 2 slightly uneven pigtails. She spotted Christopher at the counter and stopped, regarding him with the open curiosity of childhood untempered by social anxiety. "Hi," she said. "Are you a regular?" Christopher blinked, caught off guard. Yeah, I guess I am. I've never seen you before," Emma observed, walking closer. "But I'm usually at school when the regulars come. Except on Saturdays I do my homework in the back office because my grandma has book club." "Emma," Megan called from across the diner, her tone gentle but firm. "What did we talk about?" "Not to bother the customers," Emma recited dutifully. Then to Christopher, "Am I bothering you?" "Not at all," Christopher said, meaning it. There was something disarming about Emma's directness, her lack of guile. Megan appeared beside them, placing a hand on Emma's shoulder. "This is Christopher. He's a friend. Christopher, this is my daughter, Emma." "Nice to meet you, Emma," Christopher said. Emma studied him for a moment longer, then seemed to make a decision. "You're the one who got hurt, right? Mom told me someone came in who was hurt and she helped them and they were very nice." Christopher glanced at Megan, who looked slightly embarrassed. Yes, that's me." "Does it still hurt?" Emma asked with genuine concern. "Not anymore. Your mom took good care of me." Emma nodded. satisfied with this answer. She's good at taking care of people. She takes care of me and Grandma and all the customers and sometimes our neighbor Mr. Patterson when his back hurts. She paused. Did you know that a Tyrannosaurus Rex's bite force was 12,000 pounds? That's as strong as a car crusher. The sudden shift in topic made Christopher smile. I did not know that. It's true. I'm learning all about dinosaurs. My favorite is the Velociraptor because they were smart and hunted in packs. Mom says I can get a book about them if I finish all my homework this week without complaining. Emma? Megan interjected gently. Why don't you go finish your coloring while I help Christopher with his order? Okay. Bye, Christopher. I hope you come back so we can talk about dinosaurs more. I'd like that, Christopher said, and he realized he meant it. Emma bounded back toward the office, her energy seemingly boundless. Megan watched her go with an expression that mixed love, exhaustion, and something that looked like worry. Sorry about that, Megan said. She's very social, sometimes too social. She's great, Christopher said honestly. You should be proud. I am. Megan's voice softened. She's the best thing I ever did, the only thing I'm certain I got right. Christopher heard the weight in those words, the fear that lived underneath the love. He wanted to tell her that Emma would be fine, that she was doing an amazing job, that everything would work out. But he had learned that empty reassurances meant nothing. So instead, he said, She's lucky to have you. Megan's eyes met his, and for a moment something passed between them. Understanding, recognition, gratitude. Then she blinked, and the professional mask slipped back into place. What can I get you for lunch? Over the following weeks, Christopher's presence at the diner became even more integrated into the fabric of Megan's life. He started arriving earlier on Saturdays so he could see Emma, who seemed delighted to have a new adult who would listen to her endless stream of facts about prehistoric creatures, space exploration, and whatever other topic currently captured her interest. He helped Megan carry heavy boxes of supplies from the storage room to the kitchen. He fixed a wobbly table leg with materials from a hardware store, refusing payment because, as he said, friends help friends. He was there on the slow nights when Megan seemed particularly worn down, offering quiet company and terrible jokes that somehow always made her laugh despite herself. And then, on a Tuesday evening in late October, everything shifted. Christopher arrived at the diner around 10:30, later than usual because the day labor job had run long. The moment he walked in, he knew something was wrong. Megan was behind the counter, but her posture was rigid, her movements mechanical. Her face was pale, her jaw tight. Two customers sat in separate booths, oblivious, but Christopher could read the tension in every line of Megan's body. He took his usual seat and Megan came over immediately with coffee, setting it down with slightly trembling hands. You okay? Christopher asked quietly. Megan glanced toward the door, then back at him. He was here, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek, about an hour ago. Christopher felt his chest tighten. What happened? He wanted to see Emma, said it had been too long, that he had rights as her father, that I couldn't keep her from him. I told him about the restraining order, that he needed to go through the proper channels. He got, she paused, searching for the right word. Loud. Jimmy had to come out from the kitchen. Derek left, but not before making it clear he wasn't done. Did you call the authorities? What are they going to do? He didn't touch me. He didn't threaten me. Not directly. He just made sure I understood that he knows where I work, where Emma goes to school, where we live. The restraining order is just paper, Christopher. It doesn't actually protect us from anything except legally. Christopher's mind raced. He knew that feeling, the helplessness that came from knowing someone meant you harm and having no real way to stop them. Where's Emma now? With my mom. She picks her up from school on Tuesdays. I called and told her what happened. Told her to keep the doors locked and not answer if anyone comes by. Good. That's good. Christopher paused. What do you need? How can I help? Megan looked at him, and he saw fear in her eyes. Real, bone-deep fear that she had been trying to keep contained. I don't know. I've been thinking about this for 2 years, planning what I would do if he escalated. But now that it's happening, I just feel frozen. You're not frozen, Christopher said firmly. You're here. You're working. You're protecting your daughter. That's not frozen, Megan, that's survival. She nodded, but her hands were still shaking. Christopher reached across the counter without thinking and placed his hand over hers. The gesture surprised both of them, but neither pulled away. I'm going to stay until your shift ends, Christopher said. Walk you to your car. Make sure you get home safe. You don't have to do that. I know, but I'm going to anyway. Something in Megan's expression softened, the fear giving way slightly to gratitude. Thank you. The next few hours passed slowly. Christopher stayed at the counter, nursing coffee, occasionally ordering food he didn't really want just to have a reason to stay. The two customers left. A few more came and went. Megan worked with her usual efficiency, but Christopher could see the strain, the way her eyes kept darting to the door, the way she jumped slightly when the bell chimed. Around 2 in the morning, when the diner was empty except for them, Megan began her closing routine. Christopher helped without being asked, stacking chairs on tables, wiping down surfaces, carrying trash to the dumpster in the back alley. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that had developed between them over weeks of shared space and conversation. Finally, at 2:45, Megan locked the front door and turned off most of the lights. She retrieved her purse and jacket from the back office and they exited through the rear door. The alley was dark, lit only by a single security light mounted on the building across the way. Megan's car, an older Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper, sat in its usual spot. Christopher walked beside her, his presence deliberate, protective. He scanned the alley, the shadows, the spaces where someone could hide. Everything seemed clear, but his heart was beating faster than normal, adrenaline sharpening his senses. Megan unlocked her car and turned to face him. "Thank you for staying. I know it's silly, but I feel better knowing someone was here." "It's not silly," Christopher said. "And I meant what I said. I'm going to make sure you get home safe. I'll follow you in my truck." "Christopher, you don't have a truck. I've never seen you drive anything." He hesitated, then admitted, "I sold my truck 8 months ago to pay bills. But I'll take a rideshare. Follow behind you. Make sure no one else does." Megan studied his face in the dim light. "That's going to cost you money you don't have. Some things are more important than money." For a moment they just stood there, the cool October air swirling around them, carrying the scent of rain that would probably start before morning. Then Megan made a decision. "Ride with me," she said. "I'll drop you at your place after I get home. It's not that far out of the way." "You sure?" "I'm sure. And honestly, I'd rather have company on the drive. My mind goes to bad places when I'm alone in the car at night." Christopher nodded and walked around to the passenger side. The interior of the Civic was clean but worn. A child's car seat in the back, a few dinosaur toys on the floor, a air freshener shaped like a pine tree hanging from the rearview mirror. Megan started the engine and pulled out of the alley carefully, checking her mirrors multiple times. They drove in silence for the first few minutes. Megan's attention focused on the road, Christopher watching the side mirror for any cars that might be following them. The streets of southeast Portland were quiet at this hour, most of the traffic lights blinking yellow. They passed closed storefronts, late-night convenience stores, apartment buildings dark except for the occasional lit window. "I've been saving money," Megan said suddenly. "Every extra dollar I can spare. I have almost $3,000 now. It's not enough to move yet, but it's getting close." "Boise?" Christopher asked, remembering their earlier conversation. "Yeah, my cousin Sarah lives there. She's got a spare room, said we could stay as long as we need until I find work and get my own place. Emma could start fresh at a new school. Derek wouldn't know where we were, at least not right away." "When are you thinking of going?" "I don't know. Soon, maybe. Tonight scared me. Made me realize that waiting for the perfect time might mean waiting until it's too late." She glanced over at him briefly. "Would you think I was a coward if I ran?" "No," Christopher said without hesitation. "I'd think you were smart. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is leave." Megan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I keep telling myself that, but it feels like giving up, like he wins. He only wins if you let him damage you or Emma. Moving away isn't giving up. It's choosing peace over pride. There's a difference." They turned onto Division Street, heading east. Megan's apartment was in a complex near 96th, a 2-story building with exterior stairs and parking underneath. As they approached, Megan slowed down, scanning the parking lot carefully. "Everything looks normal," Christopher observed. "Yeah." But Megan still parked under the brightest light available, still checked her surroundings before getting out. Christopher exited the passenger side and walked with her to the exterior stairs. Megan's apartment was on the second floor, number 214. They climbed together, their footsteps echoing in the quiet night. At her door, Megan paused with her key in hand. "Thank you again. Really. I know I keep saying it, but I mean it. You don't have to keep thanking me," Christopher said. "This is what friends do." Megan smiled, tired but genuine. "Is that what we are? Friends?" "I'd like to think so, unless you have a better word for whatever this is." "Friends works," Megan agreed. She unlocked her door, then hesitated. "Christopher?" "Yeah? If I do decide to leave, to go to Boise, I'm going to miss having you around. These past few weeks, coming to work hasn't felt like just surviving. It's felt like something more, because of you." Christopher felt his throat tighten. "I'll miss you too. But I understand why you need to go. And I want you to be safe more than I want you to stay. They stood there on the landing, two people who had found each other in the midst of their separate struggles, both knowing that the connection they had built might not survive geography. Then Megan made a decision that surprised them both. She stepped forward and hugged him. It was brief, lasting only a few seconds, but in that moment Christopher felt something shift fundamentally in his understanding of what it meant to be close to another person. It wasn't romantic, not exactly, but it was intimate in a way that had nothing to do with physical attraction and everything to do with emotional recognition. Two broken people acknowledging that they had helped put some of each other's pieces back together. When Megan pulled back, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Get home safe, okay?" "I will. You lock this door behind you and don't open it for anyone." "Yes, sir," she said with mock seriousness, but they both knew she would follow that instruction. Christopher descended the stairs and walked to the street, where he requested a ride on his phone, an expense he couldn't afford, but refused to regret. As he waited for the car to arrive, he looked up at Megan's apartment. A light came on inside, and he saw her silhouette pass by the window. She was checking on Emma, he knew, making sure her daughter was safe and sleeping peacefully. The rideshare arrived, and Christopher gave the driver his address. As they pulled away, he looked back one more time at the apartment building, at the lit window on the second floor, and made a decision of his own. He couldn't protect Megan from everything. He couldn't solve her problems or erase her fears. But he could be present. He could show up. He could be one person in her life who didn't want anything from her except her well-being. Sometimes he was learning. The small acts of courage mattered most. Not grand gestures or dramatic interventions, but simply being there, staying, showing up day after day, even when it was hard, even when it cost something. That night, when Christopher finally lay down in his small apartment, he didn't fall asleep immediately. Instead, he stared at the ceiling and thought about connection, about friendship, about what it meant to care for someone else's safety and happiness as much as your own. And for the first time in years, he thought about the future not with dread, but with something that felt almost like hope. November arrived with cold rain and early darkness, the kind of weather that made Portland feel both beautiful and melancholy. The trees along Division Street turned brilliant shades of orange and gold before surrendering their leaves to the wind and wet pavement. The diner's windows fogged up earlier each evening, creating a cocoon of warmth that felt increasingly precious as the world outside grew colder. Christopher continued his routine of visiting Megan's diner, but now there was an underlying current of awareness that their time together might be limited. Megan hadn't made a final decision about Boise, but the possibility hung in the air between them like morning mist, present, unavoidable, changing the shape of everything it touched. Derek had appeared twice more since that first incident. Once outside Emma's school, standing across the street, watching but not approaching. Once at the grocery store where Megan shopped, coincidentally, in the same aisle, making small talk that felt more like a threat than conversation. Each encounter left Megan more shaken, more convinced that staying in Portland was becoming untenable. Christopher noticed the change in her, the way her smile took more effort, the way she checked her phone constantly, expecting bad news, the way she startled at sudden sounds. He wanted to fix it, to make the fear go away, but he was learning that some things couldn't be fixed, only endured, with support. It was a Thursday evening, 3 weeks into November, when Christopher arrived at the diner to find Megan sitting alone at a booth during what should have been the dinner rush. The diner was nearly empty, which was unusual for this hour. She was staring at her phone, her face pale, her jaw set in that particular way that meant she was trying not to cry. Christopher slid into the booth across from her without asking. "What happened?" Megan looked up, and he saw the answer in her eyes before she spoke. "Derek went to my mother's house. Today, while Emma was there after school." Christopher felt his chest constrict. "Is Emma okay?" "She's fine. My mom called the authorities immediately, and Derek left before they arrived." But he made his point. "Nowhere is safe. No one who matters to me is safe." Her voice cracked slightly. He didn't even try to see Emma directly. "He just wanted my mom to know that he knows where she lives, that he can show up whenever he wants." That's harassment. Violation of the restraining order. Maybe. Probably. But he's careful. He never quite crosses the line far enough that anyone will actually do anything about it. And even if they did, what then? He spends a night in custody and comes back angrier. Megan set her phone down, her hands trembling. "I'm done, Christopher. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep looking over my shoulder, worrying about my daughter, waiting for the next incident." "You're leaving," Christopher said. It wasn't a question. "I called Sarah this afternoon, my cousin in Boise. She said we can come anytime. I talked to my manager, gave my 2 weeks' notice." I'm pulling Emma out of school at the end of next week. My mom understands. She's actually relieved. She said she'll visit once we're settled. Christopher absorbed this information, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Relief that Megan was prioritizing her safety, sadness that she was leaving, anxiety about what would come after. That's good, he said, and meant it. That's the right decision. Is it? Megan's eyes searched his face. I feel like I'm running away, like I'm letting him win. You're choosing life over pride. There's nothing cowardly about that. Megan's expression softened slightly. I'm going to miss this place. Not the diner specifically, but these conversations, having someone who actually listens instead of just waiting for their turn to talk. I'll miss you too, Christopher said quietly. More than I know how to say. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of impending separation settling around them. Then Megan took a deep breath and seemed to make a decision. Come with us, she said suddenly. Christopher blinked. What? Come with us. To Boise. I know it sounds crazy, but think about it. What's keeping you in Portland? You said yourself you're barely surviving here. The people you owe money to, the memories of everything that went wrong, the apartment that's falling apart. What if you could start over somewhere else? Megan, I can't just... Why not? You told me you used to do construction. Boise is growing, they're building everywhere. You could find work. Real work. Not just day labor. And Sarah's house is big enough that we could figure something out, at least temporarily, until you got on your feet. She leaned forward, her voice urgent. I'm not asking you to come for me. I'm asking you to come for yourself, because I think you deserve a fresh start as much as we do. Christopher's mind raced. The idea was absurd. He barely knew Megan, had only been in her life for a few months. He had debts here, responsibilities, a life that was admittedly falling apart but was still his life. You couldn't just run away from your problems. Except maybe sometimes you could. Maybe sometimes the bravest thing was admitting that the place you were wasn't working and having the courage to try somewhere new. I don't have money saved like you do, Christopher said slowly. I've got maybe $600 to my name. That's not enough to move, to start over. So save for 2 weeks. Pick up every shift you can, and I'll help. I've got some extra that I can loan you. And before you say no, remember that loans are different than charity. You can pay me back when you're working again. What about the people I owe money to here? They're not just going to forget about me. They're also not going to follow you to Idaho for what you owe them. It's not worth their time or resources. And maybe once you're working steadily again, you can set up payment plans, send money back. But you can't pay anyone back if you're stuck in survival mode forever. Christopher wanted to argue, to list all the reasons this was impossible. But as he sat there looking at Megan's hopeful, exhausted face, he realized something. He was tired of impossible being his default setting. Tired of assuming every door was closed before he even tried the handle. Let me think about it, he said finally. Not because I don't want to, but because I need to make sure I'm doing it for the right reasons. Megan nodded, understanding. Take the time you need. But Christopher, don't let fear make the decision for you. I've watched you these past few months. You're stronger than you think you are. Over the next week, Christopher wrestled with the decision. He picked up every available work shift, sometimes working 15-hour days, pushing his body past exhaustion. He saved every dollar he could, cutting his expenses down to absolute necessities. He thought about Portland, about the life he had built and lost here, about whether leaving meant giving up or moving forward. He also thought about Megan and Emma, about the strange little family unit they had started to form. He thought about the diner at 2 a.m, about cold cloths pressed to bruised faces, about conversations that made him feel human again. He thought about Emma's endless dinosaur facts, about the way Megan's whole face changed when she smiled, about feeling needed and valued in a way he hadn't experienced in years. And he thought about Boise, a city he had never seen, where no one knew his failures or his debts, where he could be just Christopher, not Christopher who lost his business or Christopher who couldn't make it work, but just a man trying to build something honest and good. On Tuesday evening, 9 days after their conversation, Christopher walked into the diner during Megan's shift. She was wiping down the counter, and when she saw him, she stopped mid-motion, reading something in his expression. I'm coming with you, Christopher said without preamble. If the offer still stands, I'm coming to Boise. Megan's face transformed, relief and joy and something deeper flooding her features. Really? Really? I've got $1,100 saved. It's not much, but it's a start. And you're right. There's nothing keeping me here except fear and habit. Time to try something different. Megan came around the counter and hugged him, tight and fierce. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with tears. You're not going to regret this. I promise you won't regret this. I know, Christopher said, and realized he believed it. The final week in Portland passed in a blur of preparation and goodbyes. Megan worked her last shifts at the diner, receiving hugs and well wishes from regular customers who had become something like friends over the years. Jimmy, the cook, gave her his grandmother's recipe for apple pie, written in shaky handwriting on an index card. Mr. Patterson, the elderly man who came in every night, pressed $50 into her hand and told her to buy Emma something nice. Christopher gave notice at his apartment, packed his few belongings into 2 duffel bags and a backpack, and felt lighter with each item he decided to leave behind. Old clothes he never wore, books he would never reread, kitchen items for cooking he never did, the accumulation of a life that had stopped fitting long ago. He also did something he hadn't done in months. He called his brother in California. "Mark, it's Christopher." A pause on the other end. Surprise evident. "Chris, wow, it's been a while." "I know, I'm sorry about that. I've been dealing with some things. Are you okay? Do you need money again?" The assumption stung, even though it was fair given their history. "No, actually, I'm calling to tell you I'm leaving Portland, moving to Idaho, starting over." Another pause. Longer this time. That's good, Chris. Really good. Portland wasn't working out? Not even a little bit. But I think maybe Boise will be different. They talked for 20 minutes. The longest conversation they'd had in over a year. Christopher didn't go into details about everything that had happened, but he shared enough that Mark understood this wasn't running away. It was running toward. Before they hung up, Mark said something that stayed with Christopher. "I'm proud of you, little brother. It takes guts to admit when you need to change everything." On the night before they left, Christopher came to the diner one last time. It was 2 a.m, Megan's final shift, and the place was empty except for them. She had already cleaned everything, closed out the register, said her goodbyes to the night manager who would take over her shifts. Now it was just the 2 of them in the space that had witnessed their transformation from strangers to something neither of them quite had words for yet. Megan emerged from the back with the blue tub, the same one she had used that first night. She filled it with ice and water, wrung out a clean cloth, and approached Christopher with a small, sad smile. "For old time's sake?" she asked. Christopher nodded, understanding the ritual. She pressed the cold cloth against his forehead, even though there were no bruises to treat now, no visible wounds to tend. But they both knew the gesture meant more than physical healing. It was about acknowledgement, about care, about one person seeing another person's pain and trying to ease it in whatever small way possible. Christopher closed his eyes, feeling the cold seep into his skin, feeling Megan's steady presence beside him, and then, just like before, tears came. But this time they were different. Not tears of despair or accumulated grief, but tears of release, tears of gratitude, tears of hope for what might come next. When he opened his eyes, Megan was crying too, silent tears running down her cheeks. They looked at each other across the counter, 2 people who had saved each other without meaning to, and smiled through their tears. "Thank you," Christopher said, "for everything, for seeing me when I felt invisible, for reminding me that I was still worth something. Thank you for showing me that kindness doesn't have to hurt." Megan replied, "That not everyone wants to take from me, that letting someone in doesn't mean losing myself." They cleaned up the tub together, turned off the lights, locked the door for the last time. Outside, the November air was cold and crisp, carrying the promise of winter. Megan's car was packed with boxes. Emma's car seat, everything they owned that mattered enough to bring. Christopher's bags were already in the trunk. He had dropped them off earlier, making the commitment real and irreversible. "Ready?" Megan asked. "As I'll ever be." They drove to Megan's apartment, where Emma was sleeping on an air mattress surrounded by the few toys she had chosen to bring. All dinosaurs, of course. Megan's mother was there, having stayed to help with the final preparations. She hugged her daughter tight, whispering things Christopher couldn't hear but understood were about love and safety, and the courage it took to choose both. Then she turned to Christopher, this woman he had only met briefly, and took his hands in hers. "Take care of them," she said simply. "I will," Christopher promised. "And they'll take care of me, that's how this works." Megan's mother smiled, tears on her cheeks, and pressed a piece of paper into his hand. "My phone number. Call me if you need anything. Any of you." They loaded the last few items into the car. Emma woke briefly, confused and sleepy, but settled back down once Megan explained they were starting their adventure. Christopher took the passenger seat, Megan behind the wheel, Emma in her car seat in the back with a dinosaur plush clutched in her arms. The drive to Boise would take about 8 hours, not counting stops. They planned to leave at 3 in the morning to avoid traffic and arrive in the afternoon with time to settle before dark. Megan pulled out of the apartment complex parking lot slowly, looking in the rearview mirror one last time at the place she had called home for 2 years. Christopher watched Portland slip away through the passenger window, the familiar streets, the all-night convenience stores, the apartment buildings that all looked the same in the dark. He thought about everything this city had witnessed, his failures, his losses, his slow descent into desperation, but also his survival, his resilience, his eventual willingness to accept help and offer it in return. As they merged onto Interstate 84 heading east, Megan reached over and took Christopher's hand briefly, squeezing once before returning it to the steering wheel. In the back seat, Emma snored softly, her dinosaur rising and falling with each breath. "You scared?" Megan asked quietly. "Terrified," Christopher admitted. "You?" "Same, but also excited. Is that weird?" "No, I think that's exactly right. Fear and hope aren't opposites. Sometimes they're the same thing wearing different clothes." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the highway stretching out before them, dark and empty and full of possibility. Christopher thought about the conversation that had started all of this. Megan asking if he was from around here, sharing her own story of escape and survival, offering him pie on the house. Such a small gesture, meaningless to anyone else, but to him, it had been everything. He thought about the cold cloth pressed to his bruised face, about the tears he hadn't known he needed to cry, about the slow rebuilding of his sense of self-worth through simple acts of friendship and care. He thought about Emma's dinosaur facts and Megan's tired smile, and the way the diner had felt like sanctuary when the rest of the world felt hostile. He thought about learning to accept help, to offer it, to exist in the messy space of mutual support where neither person was the savior or the saved, but both were simply human, trying their best. As the sun began to rise somewhere beyond the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep purple and rose gold, Christopher allowed himself to imagine what came next. Finding work in Boise, helping Emma with her homework, having dinner with Megan and Sarah, building the kind of chosen family that mattered more than blood, slowly paying off his debts, rebuilding his credit, maybe eventually starting another business. Smaller this time, more careful, but still his. He imagined holidays and ordinary Tuesdays and everything in between. He imagined hard days and good days, and the million moments that made up a life. He imagined being the kind of person who showed up, who stayed, who remembered what it felt like to be drowning and extended a hand to others struggling to stay afloat. "Christopher?" Megan's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Yeah? I'm really glad you walked into the diner that night." Christopher looked over at her, this woman who had pressed a cold cloth to his bruised face and somehow pressed hope back into his heart. "Me too. Me too." Emma stirred in the back seat, yawned, and asked sleepily, "Are we in Idaho yet?" "Not yet, sweetheart," Megan said, "but we're getting closer." "Will they have dinosaurs in Idaho?" "They have dinosaur fossils," Christopher offered. "Real ones. We can visit museums and see them." Emma's eyes widened with delight. "Really? Can we? Mom, can we?" "We'll see," Megan said, but she was smiling. "First we need to get there and get settled." "I can't wait," Emma announced, then immediately fell back asleep, her head lolling against the side of her car seat. Christopher watched the landscape change as they drove, Portland's urban sprawl giving way to small towns, then to stretches of farmland and forest, then to the dramatic beauty of the Columbia River Gorge. The sun rose fully, flooding the car with golden light, and everything felt washed clean, new, full of potential. He pulled out his phone and looked at his reflection in the black screen before it powered on. For the first time in years, he recognized the man looking back at him, not the man he had been before everything fell apart, and not the man he had become in the depths of his struggle, but someone new, someone who had been broken and was putting himself back together with the help of others, who understood what it meant to survive. Scars, yes. Damage, absolutely. But also strength, also resilience. Also the knowledge that the human capacity for connection and kindness could create light even in the darkest places. As they crossed into Idaho hours later, a small sign welcoming them to the state, Emma woke again and cheered. Megan laughed, the sound pure and unguarded. Christopher felt something in his chest loosen, a tightness that had been there so long he had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. They still had problems. Megan would need to find work. Christopher would need to build a life from almost nothing. Emma would need to adjust to a new school, new friends, a new normal. There would be hard days ahead, setbacks, moments of doubt, but they wouldn't face those things alone. And that, Christopher was learning, made all the difference. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of people willing to struggle alongside you. Not the elimination of pain, but the existence of hands willing to press cold cloths to bruised faces, both literal and metaphorical, and say without words, "I see you. You matter. You're not alone." As they pulled into Boise in the early afternoon, the city spread out before them under a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Christopher thought about beginning again, about how endings and beginnings were often the same moment, viewed from different angles, about how sometimes you had to lose everything to find out what actually mattered. Sarah's house was in a quiet neighborhood with trees lining the streets and mountains visible in the distance. She came out to meet them before they even finished parking, her arms open, her smile wide and welcoming. "You made it. Come on, come inside. I've got lunch ready and Emma's room all set up." Emma bolted from the car, immediately launching into an explanation about the dinosaurs she had seen in picture books about Idaho. Megan followed more slowly, her exhaustion evident, but her expression peaceful. She looked back at Christopher, who was pulling their bags from the trunk, and smiled. "Coming?" she called. Christopher grabbed the last bag, closed the trunk, and looked up at the blue Idaho sky. He thought about cold cloths and warm coffee, about kindness offered and received, about the weight of silence and the courage it took to break it. He thought about all the small acts that added up to survival, to healing, to hope. "Yeah," he said, walking toward the house where Megan and Emma waited, where a new life was beginning to take shape, where light had found its way in. "I'm coming." And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Christopher believed that everything might actually be okay. Not perfect, not without struggle, but okay in the way that mattered most. Surrounded by people who cared, moving toward something better, carrying hope instead of just pain. The door to Sarah's house stood open, warm light spilling out onto the porch. Inside, he could hear laughter and conversation, the sounds of life continuing, of new chapters beginning. Christopher stepped through that door, leaving the past on the other side, and walked into whatever came next.